Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With immense pleasure, we have Rehan over here. Many of you know Rehan already. Rehan is one of the few, he's one of the entrepreneurs who became a VC at a very early stage in India when the ecosystem was still developing. And I don't think a lot of people possibly were thinking about this at that point when he started off with this. He is a thoroughbred Bombay boy, a thoroughbred foodie, from what I read as well also. Leads investments in consumer tech. Rehan founded his own business, which I think was, as you hear from him directly as well also, which was Flora 2000. It was founded in the year 2004? 2004. And that became basically the basis of learning for many, many things for him itself also. He got early insights into marketing and digital marketing and complex operations. Rehan is a founder of Indian Angel Network's Mumbai chapter. He's a co-founder of the Harvard Angel Network as well, a Thai charter member and executive council of IVCA, the Indian Venture Capital Association. He's also the founder of two gourmet clubs. As his website says, he's the chief foodie in the house, but it works well because every one of their offices has a gym attached to it as well.
We're mostly in WeWorks.
Okay, all right. It's very fascinating that, with all the success where we speak, Rehan's very well known for Ola, which is his large success, and Dhruva after that, and many more, which have subsequently he's invested in. I'm sure we'll hear more about it as well. That he decided at this point to write a book and to enlighten all of us about how we can have luck on our side. It's for someone who's been an entrepreneur and who believes, and after reading this, the last 5 days I've been reading this book, I must tell you that a lot of life is what you make of it. And it really put things into perspective for me because life happened like that to me as well. And without much ado, over to Rehan. Welcome to Chennai.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much for having me in this wonderful city. My friend Gopal Srinivasan, when he heard that I was doing, unfortunately he's not here today, but when he heard that the book was out, he said, Rehan, you got to do Chennai. So I said, yeah, man, have me over. I'll come, for sure. To do this. So me and him are on the executive council at IBCA. That's how we know each other, and of course in the same industry. I'll tell you a little bit of the genesis of how the book happened. I have a friend, I think it's very interesting what Mithun said. How did I end up, mid-career writing a book when typically, most people write it much later. So what happened was that I actually have a friend in the US, and he's my co-author in the book, a gentleman called Bob Miglani. And Bob has been an executive at Pfizer. He took the corporate ladder, and he's a senior executive and he was a senior executive at Pfizer till very recently. And his hobby was writing, right? So he wrote multiple books, and one of his books called Embrace the Chaos was a huge success in the US. It's a kind of a self-help book, about how you handle different things in life. And Bob was very keen. Every time he met me, he has that American enthusiasm, man, you got to do it, right? Kind of thing. He kept, every time he met me, he said, you got to, put down these stories from the Indian startup ecosystem. So I said, yeah, I kept putting him off. And, this conversation went on, I think, for almost 10 years. Right, we would keep talking about it, and then one day me and him were having dinner in Bombay, and we started talking about Ola. Right, this conversation came up about how Ola's investment had been very successful. It had multiplied many times over, and he said, Rehan, why you, man? Why not me? Right? Why did you get so lucky? And then we ended up having this whole conversation around the notion of luck, right? And our entire dinner passed on that, and the next day also we had this conversation. And what dawned upon both of us is that something which has been ingrained in us from childhood, right, by our parents, by the environment, and everything around us, that luck is this random thing that happens to us. It is completely out of our control. That's why we go to the temples, we go to palmists, we try to do good deeds to make it happen to us, right? And that is generally how we've been taught. That it is a random thing, and of course, you always have friends and associates who are always luckier than you are, right? And that's the other part of it. So we started asking ourselves this question: that is really luck a matter of randomness, or do the gods favor a few and disfavor others? Is this how life is? Is it so unfair? Is it so by chance? A factor. And then what we realized after this conversation was that luck is probably what we call luck is 85% positive action that you take, and maybe only 15% of it is just real randomness, right? Some aunt dies, leaves you money, or somebody favors you somewhere just out of randomness. So we made a few notes, and then over 2 years, Bob lived in the US and I lived in Bombay, right? And over 2 years, we started writing this book down, right? We did it in a very kind of a disciplined manner. Every evening on Monday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., we would write the book, India time, right? And on Skype. So we did that. We rewrote a large portion of it. We said, no, this is not a great factor. Let's put this other factor in. And we also researched a number of case studies, because while we were researching this, we came across cases. So the book, the way it's structured, is that it has what we call 7 luck accelerators inside of it, which are the 7 factors which we think help the most in success. And each of these is then backed up with numerous case studies. Case studies from my experience, the startup world, case studies from Bob's experience in the corporate world in the US, and US case studies. So that is how the book is structured. And Mithun has a whole lot of questions for me, but I'll give you an example of one of the chapters. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about my own story before I sort of get into that. I started as a first-generation entrepreneur in 1992, straight out of college. I went to St. Xavier's College in Bombay, and economics school like this one. I loved economics. It was my favorite subject, macro, micro, price inelasticity and all those kind of lovely things. So I loved that. Samuelson was my hero, back then. So I studied that, and as soon as I got out of college, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be an entrepreneur while I was in college, but I had to finish it, otherwise my father would be very upset with me. So I did that, and I ended up, doing company after company. So I did my first company 1992 to 1998. It was semi-successful. I won't really call it a success, but I learned a lot from it. Then I went on to do something which was successful. Then I did a third company, which also did well. And along the way of doing these companies, in 2008, I started making angel investments, right? And my first investment, and we've written about it in the book, was actually just a matter of wanting to help someone. So I'm a techie, and I can code a bit. So I was actually on a coding forum in one of these forums, and I came across a very good answer to a question. Somebody had posed a question, not me. Someone else had posed a question, and somebody gave an extremely elegant and thoughtful answer to that. So I thought, wow, this is a very cool person, So I thought I'd interact with that person directly. It turned out it was an Indian guy. This was an international forum. It wasn't an Indian forum. And so I got talking to the guy. His name was Jaspreet Singh. I asked him, what do you do? So he said, I used to work in Simon Tech, and I've quit. And now I've got together with a couple of other people, and I'm doing this company, right? In the backup space. And at that time, I was running an online web company called Flora 2000, which delivered gifts, all over the world, right? So it focused on the US diaspora for sending flowers and gifts back home. It was a niche business, but we did that. So I understood the problem that he was solving, which was the problem around backup, right? If you're a web entrepreneur and you're kind of doing this thing, you understand that issue. So I thought it was a great idea. He had this solution around continuous backup, continuously backing up things. So I wanted that to succeed. So I said, man, I'll help you out. I'll put some money in your company. I never thought of myself as an angel investor. That I didn't know that term at that time. I just wanted to help the guy out. And I said, I'll introduce you to some other people. And nobody else wanted to invest because nobody believed that a software company from India would come and succeed and could become large. But they didn't have the advantage I had, where I actually understood the problem that he had solved. So they didn't want to take that leap of faith. But at the same time, as things that had happened, is I was invited by some people in Delhi who had formed something called Band of Angels back then, right, in India. Saurabh Srivastav and these guys to join that, and I think I was the sixth member in there. So I said, listen, there's this forum, and this forum says that they want to invest in companies, so let me take you to that forum, right? So I took him to that forum in Delhi, and he was rejected at the forum. He said, no, we don't want to invest in this company, right? Same answer. But I knew a couple of people in there directly, and the founder, Saurabh Srivastav, said, no, Rehan, I understand this, I'll invest. And there was another guy called Rajan Anandan, who in those days was running Dell in India. Right? He was also on it, and he was a guy who had come back from Silicon Valley, and he had seen all these stories. So, 3-4 of us got together and made this investment. It was a very difficult round to close. And that happened to be my very first angel investment. As things would have it, Dhruva recently crossed $100 million in annual recurring revenue. Which is a very, very big deal for an Indian software product company, right? And we expect in another 2 years to be $200 million in annual recurring revenue, and the company will hopefully IPO on the Nasdaq in the US, right? So that turned out to be a very, very good story. But then, when I made that investment, I realized that, hey, if I can do Dhruva, then, why not other companies? I understand tech. So that started my sort of hobby of angel investing. And I was still running Flora 2000, so I would literally do this on the weekend. And over many years, 6-7 years, I ended up investing in 22 companies, out of which 15 I led. And some of those did fairly well. One of them was Ola Cabs, which I was the first investor in. Many other such things happened. So that was sort of the origin of my investing career. I then formalized that career, as a fund. Added partners. Now I'm one of 3 managing partners in my fund, and our story continues, right? So that's a little bit by way of background. I'll share with you the very first chapter of the book, and I think this first chapter of the book, to my mind, is a very simple chapter, but I think one of the most important chapters, right? Which is this whole notion around being curious and being prepared. So very often, we come across people in life who do not succeed simply because of lack of preparation. I was with a journalist earlier today, and she asked me, if you look back at your career, what is the single one thing which you've improved on? I would say that I'm more prepared now than I used to be earlier when I get into something or when I try and do something. So I think this whole notion of being prepared, well prepared, getting into something is an extremely underrated one. I'm still shocked by how many people come for a job interview and will ask me, what does your company do? I mean, the guy's asking me at the job interview, why did you apply to this company? If you don't know what it does, right? So they're not prepared, right? I'm shocked at the number of business plans that I receive, and you ask them, so what is your competition like? And they don't really know, right, who the competitors are. So they're not prepared. They're not even evaluated if there's a lot of competition in there. So I think lack of preparedness, let's not confuse it with naivety, right? Let's not confuse that with naivety. I think that is a very, very important factor in being lucky, right, in being successful. Otherwise you just go for the job and you say, no, I didn't get lucky, and this other guy has connections, so he got the job, or whatever, he went to IIT, so he got the job, right? And you didn't go prepared, right? And that is possibly one of the biggest issues. So the first chapter is around that, and I'll tell you the story of Ola in there, and how preparedness helped me actually make that investment, right? So the backstory on Ola is that a year prior to Ola, I had seen a company called Redbus. And this was a company, as some of you might know, in the bus ticketing space, right? So there was a nice founder, a guy called Funny, and he had this idea of this bus ticketing thing, and I related, as a student and all, we've all taken these buses, right? ST buses, and very hard to get tickets in Bombay. You have to go to this place called Dadar, and you have to just try to wrangle a ticket from somewhere. So I could relate to the problem. I said, yeah, it's a good problem. But the issue was, in his business, his gross margin was very small, right? And I, being an entrepreneur for so many years, had been very obsessed on gross margin, right? So this guy only had 1% gross margin in the business. So I said, yeah, looks like a very difficult business to me. The addressable market looks very large, but your margin is very small, right? So I ended up not investing in it. Probably a bad pass, because, he later on sold it for $140 million. Right? And at that time when he was pitching to me, I think his valuation was $100,000 or something like that. But what happened was, I became very curious about the ground transportation space as a result of that. It was a space which I'd never thought about earlier, right? One doesn't really think about ground transportation because nobody defines ground transportation as an industry. You define education as an industry, you define healthcare as an industry, you define retail as an industry, but nobody defines ground transportation as an industry. And what my insight led me to understand, that ground transportation is probably the world's largest industry, because everybody needs to move around, right? So whether it's taking buses, it's taking cabs, whether it's walking, mass transportation, automobile industry, tire industry, gas stations, etc., they're all part of this massive space called ground transportation, right? Because as human beings, we all need to constantly move around. So what I did was, I started studying that industry in depth, right? And I understood there are many, many different cuts to this industry, right? And I started getting into those cuts and understanding them. One of the things I understood is that, for example, for fleet management, anyone who has any kind of a fleet business, to turn the asset around multiple times a day, as much as you can in a single day, is what actually gives you better and better gross margin, right? You make the asset sweat more, because the only thing which is fixed are your EMI and your driver cost is because your EMI and your driver cost is fixed. The only things which are variable are actually tires and fuel, right? In ground transportation. So you need to really sweat the asset, and those who can sweat the asset the most, do well in that business, right? So that is one thing I understood. Along with that, I had seen a company in Bombay called Meru cabs, which had come up, right? And we were all using it in Bombay to go to the airport in those days. So every time you had an airport drop, you would do a Meru, right? And it was very convenient. It was revolutionary because, Bombay cabs, I don't know if you've taken them, but they can be very, very difficult. I remember once I was traveling in a Bombay cab, and I was wearing a slipper because it was a monsoon, and my slipper fell through the hole in the cab and I lost it. That's how the cabs in Bombay used to be, right, back in those days. So we loved Meru. We would use Meru, right? But the issue with Meru was that there were two issues with Meru when I ended up studying Meru, right? One was that the guy was buying assets, right? He was buying cabs, so it made it a very asset-heavy business. And the second was that I didn't find any tech in the company, right? So they were doing this old dispatch system, ke phone karo, yaar, acha tar deo, send the cab there, right? Kind of thing. This old cab dispatch model. Then how do you get asset yield? How do you get, how do you churn the asset if you don't have any technology in there? That's very difficult. So I studied that. It wasn't an investment for us to make, for me to make anyway at that time, but it was in the back of my mind, right? Then I started getting some pitches. Actually, Ola was not the first pitch I got in the space. I got a company called Savari, and I think that company was from Chennai, if I'm not mistaken. There was a company called Savari, which had this cab aggregator model, right? So I met the guys and they said, listen, our insight is that there are a lot of cabs in India, all the T tourist vehicles in India. I don't need to buy cabs, I just need to aggregate them. So I said, yeah, it's a great idea. And my current business at that time, which was Flora 2000, was a similar model. We didn't own florist shops, we had a website. We would receive orders and we would forward it to all these florist shops, and we had 180 country coverage, right, as a result. So I said, yeah, it's a great idea that you can aggregate vehicles. But the team didn't have any tech in it, right? Again, they would end up doing this old kind of dispatch model. And, one of my theses was that in order to build, this kind of business, you would need some kind of algorithms in the back end, right, in order to make this whole thing happen. So I didn't end up investing in that. Then I remember I met another company in that space, and they also had a similar issue. Then I met these guys, right, from the Bhavish and Ankit. And I met them I met them at an event. So I used to go to startup events, literally to hang around to meet interesting companies. And somebody introduced me to Bhavish, the founder. And I remember we were in the buffet, and I think somewhere between dal and raita, he pitched me, the whole idea. And I remember asking him, it struck me, yeah, it's a good idea, because I'd already seen this model. I said, so what do you do? He said, I'm working I just quit. I used to be at Microsoft Research. So so that got me very interested. So I said, so what did you study? He said, I went to IIT, I studied computer science. I said, your partner? He said, my partner also studied computer science, right? So then it clicked that if anyone could pull it off, these guys would be able to pull it off, because they had an algorithmic background in that. So I said, man, sure, I'll invest in your company, right? It was almost an instantaneous decision. I think next day, I called him and I said, done, I'll invest. And he was raising a very small round. He was raising 60 lakh rupees, right, back then. And he had not done any rides. And there was no Uber for validation back then. This was pre-Uber. There are a lot of people think Ola was a copy of Uber. It wasn't. It was a different model. They had not figured out they could use GPS for billing. They were billing by the minute, right? They were using time to bill your fare. But then when I tried to syndicate the round, I said, okay, I'll put in 10 lakhs from the 60, and I'll take it around to other angels. When I tried to syndicate the round, people in Bombay were like, yeah, I was going to call this cab. I can wave my arm and get a cab, or I'll use a Meru. So they were very dismissive of it. So I said, chalo, I'll put in 20 lakhs, I'll put in 30 lakhs. So I kept on increasing it. So actually, in hindsight, a bad angel decision, because, you should never do that as an angel, where you keep on saying more and more of the round. I ended up being 70% of the round. Then I thought, yaar, bas ho gaya, I can't do more. So I called a friend of mine, Anupam, who was running Shadi.com, who was also angel investing. So I told him, boss, forget anything else, just invest in the company, trust me, right? He also met the guy, he liked the guy, he said, yeah, done, I'll put in the balance. And that's how that 60 lakh rupee round got done. We used to own 25% of the company for that 60 lakhs when we started, right? And then, of course, as you know, the company did very well, and it went on. So that is sort of the backstory on how I think preparedness or understanding a space. And parallelly, I remember I was pitched Capital Float, and I knew nothing about the finance industry, so I missed it, right? Because I was not prepared. I didn't understand that space. I said, lending, I don't know, man. I'll have to study this thing. I don't understand your proposition fully, right? I wasn't prepared. So preparedness helped me get it. Lack of preparedness has often made me miss, many things. So what we try to do as a fund now is we try to be prepared in some spaces, right? We call it a thesis-driven approach. So at least you can't, today you're getting startups in EVs and all kinds of robotics, and every single area you're getting startups in. You can't possibly cover every sort of area. So we try to at least be prepared in some areas to try to pick up things in those areas. So that is the first lesson or the first chapter that we have in the book, about how being prepared, being curious can be a very important success factor for you. Along with this very tangible example. My co-author Bob gives a similar example in his career. He talks about how when he went for his first job, and again, he wasn't from a prestigious college in the US, and he had applied to Pfizer, and Pfizer would normally hire from very prestigious companies, from very prestigious colleges. He had 1 month for his he had a 1 month out date for his interview. So in that 1 month, he talks about how he read 10 books on how to be a great sales rep. Right. So when he went for that interview, he was very prepared to answer questions on how to be a sales rep. And I think his prospective boss liked that in him and gave him the job. So it's a very, very simple idea that we've presented in here. This notion of being curious and being prepared, and I think that's the first chapter of the book. So I hope this has served as a good introduction to my background and what the book is about. Maybe I can now get Mithun to grill me on some questions around what he's prepared.
So yeah, I'm coming back to that. Started out building your own thing, not one, not two, but almost like 3 or 4. And there's obviously this massive curiosity to keep doing something again and again with things as well also. And then obviously investing, you're very successful, and that comes through in various forms across as well also. What really drove you to write the book as well? And like, why now, and why share this in this format? It's a very different format of a book as well also.
Yeah.
It's you don't get a book with a to-do sheet at the end of it as well. Every chapter almost comes with that.
Yeah, the honest truth is Bob McLarney drove me to write the book. He hounded me. He said, "Man, we got to write this book. We got to write this book." But I think I think what definitely Bob was a huge factor in writing the book. He's this massive enthusiast. He wanted to write a book, but I think the idea was, that the one book I did not want to write was another startup book. Just about startups. I mean, there are enough of those 0 to 1, blitzscaling. I didn't want to write another startup book. And B, I thought the idea that one should write something from the Indian context was, I think, also very important. I think there are a lot of stories from the US context here in India, and they are, I would say, semi-relevant because, as you know, India is a very, very different country. So I wanted to share stories from here, and B, this idea that we could do it for, that I could put it together for a broader audience together with Bob. I think those two are very compelling and interesting ideas, which said that one should write this book. And then when we were actually able to crystallize, 7, 8 sort of ideas, strong ideas, in my opinion, that actually contributed to success. And I felt that in India, where we are a growing nation, we are a nation which is very, very keen to grow. Right? We are not a satiated nation over here. You meet a lot of entrepreneurs and people, and we're being approached by people all the time. There's Thai here, there's Chennai Angels here, and you see how the entrepreneurship culture is progressing in this country. I thought it was I thought it would be very useful for these youngsters to have this kind of some sort of a framework that they could potentially use to help go ahead, right? So it was a confluence of these factors that really led to wanting to do this now versus 15, 20 years out.
And the structure as well comes from that? The question, I mean the to-do list at the end of it?
Yes, because so Mithun, what happens is that when you read these kind of books, and there are many great books out there, right? And I found that when you just read them like a book and you don't actually ask questions, and very few books actually do that, right? Ask questions. It doesn't help crystallize the idea in the person's mind about what you've actually spoken about. It becomes a good read, right? It's great to read Ola's story, Dhruva's story, Farmi's story. They're great tales. You read them and, ek kaan se in and dusre kaan se out kind of thing happens, right? So we want to do that. And one of the things we recommend, and I've tweeted about this, I say that read it twice. also, right, to really let the thing sink in. So we really wanted it to sink in by asking some questions at the end of it.
One, this is sharing a bit of my experience with yours. I read in the book about how you got your mom to invest in Ola as well.
Yeah.
I couldn't get my dad to invest in my business.
Neither could Bhavesh. So his dad invested 1 lakh in the company, right? So Mr. Agarwal was a doctor, and he believed his son was becoming a travel agent doing Ola. So he said, okay, I'll put 1 lakh, to show I'm a good dad. No, I think what had happened was that, as I told you, right, at that time, and I wasn't making a lot of money, right? So when I went from 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs to 30 lakhs to 40 lakhs, right? At some point I said, okay, I don't have enough money. So I said, let me try and convince my mom to put in a little bit, right? So I did that. And I think she did about half the round. Half of my commitment was hers, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And she had seen Dhruva.
Does she ask you every day now? Like, tell me the next one?
Yeah. Now I just put it in the fund now. Just become LP in the fund.
Yeah. On the, you speak a lot about in the second chapter about the path, the less traveled path as well also. And obviously Ola is one such thing that there was no precedent to it at that point.
Yeah.
Nobody even thinking like that. And I remember very clearly when Tiger Global was making their investment in that as well. I think it was a $5 million round or a $6 million round at that point as well. Literally, I mean, at that point he had visibility to Uber at least. And the thesis really used to be what was happening over there and bringing it back over here, or looking for similar things happening in India at least at that point for them. When you say not taken, someone's got to take the leap and do this, but it's so hard in an Indian context. Our support systems don't exist like that, and something that is not done in the West is extremely hard to get funded in India.
Yeah. Mithun, I'll tell you, actually, I deeply believe the reverse is actually how one should look at it, right? I find, and this is my personal experience, through mistakes made and lessons learned, is what I find is that entrepreneurs which copy models from the West don't create great businesses, right? And the reason for that is not because there is some kind of a mismatch between the model from the US to India. It is because the person does not have problem-solving ability on their own, right? If I was a person who had problem-solving ability, then I should be able to observe my environment, see a problem, and deliver a solution for it, right? Creating a company or a startup is an iterative process. I have to constantly innovate and create things. So I need that kind of a mindset, which is a problem-solving and innovating mindset, right? So what I learned was that these guys that pick up these models from other countries, they may get that first iteration right because that's the copy, but then they can't keep iterating the model, right? They don't have the creative juices in them to do that. So after making mistakes and investing in some of these people, now we are very, very conscious of investing in ideas which are not actually a replica of, something in China and Europe and America, where somebody comes and says, so what is the problem you saw, right? We always ask that question that led you to this. If the answer is that, ByteDance is doing really well in China, so I'm kind of doing that here, that's a tough one, I think. Yeah.
The environment is very different, and the problems to solve itself will be very different as well also. Besides, of course, being iterative, which is the second phase of it as well also.
Yeah, so I think it's less of the model. I think it's more of the person. And one thing I've learned in this space is that the opportunity, right? A lot of people often see, but it is really great teams that can get those opportunities, right? So I think it really boils down to the person in there more than the model, if you ask me.
Yeah. You speak a lot about the mindset of a person as well when you want to create a business as well, or the chapter itself is modeled on that. How do you personally do it? Because you're in a business where you're investing and learning about other businesses all the time. The way thesis is one part of it, but you have to wake up every morning and learn more about the subject as well also. And
Right.
you've been an entrepreneur. Don't you feel like diving back into it and doing that? Or is it like when I had a business, my aspiration, most people have an aspiration that my boss's business role is now my aspiration as well. So I
Right.
always wondered what it was like to be the VC itself. I could never make that jump. But is it that it's now going backwards if someone has to think like that?
No, so I'll tell you, it's a very interesting perception, but that venture capital is not a business. So venture capital itself is a business.
Yeah.
Right? It's financial services industry.
Right.
So I have made the transition from I've made the transition from being an entrepreneur in the e-commerce space to being an entrepreneur in the financial services space. So to my mind, it's yet a business, right? Which we are trying to build, we're trying to grow. We are a young fund in that sense, 4 or 5 years old. So it's a startup in many ways. We're a startup fund in many ways. I think it's a great time to be a venture capital fund in India. The industry is very, very nascent in India. I think in 10 years or 15 years from now, some very large brands can be built in the venture capital space in India. And I think those brands that will be built just like we've seen in banking, will be Indian brands that will be very large. So I think almost all industries start off in this manner. First, you have the MNC companies, and they have the large brands. At least we saw that in financial services. Then over time, the domestic brands, they sort of power ahead. So I think we are in that phase of venture capital in India where we have a lot of foreign brands currently, and there are lots of nascent Indian brands, us being one of them in the venture capital space. But if I'm to look out 15 years from now, I think it'll be the reverse. I think the Indian brands will power ahead. They'll become larger. That is so in a way it is a continuation of my entrepreneurial journey, and it's a fantastic time to be in venture capital at this moment.
Actually, I'm going to rephrase my question a little bit. You're right. I possibly got that wrong. You're curious by nature. You're looking at thesis, which means you go really deep into an area as well to understand that area. And then if someone doesn't solve that problem, does it tempt you to put a team together to solve the problem ever?
No, absolutely not, right? Because the difference between an entrepreneur and a manager is that the entrepreneur has given birth to the idea, right? Whereas the manager is implementing the idea. So our job here is to back entrepreneurs. This is a person who he or she has come up with this idea. They're obsessed with this idea that this has to be done. This can be done. This problem can be solved. They're living and breathing it. They're willing to work 18 to 20 hours a day behind it, and really do this thing. So they need to own that idea. I think this notion of you coming up with an idea and then getting someone to sort of come and execute that, I think that's not venture capital, if you ask me.
It has happened though, right?
That's the whole conglomerate model, right? That's what the Tatas and the Birlas and all these guys have been doing for years, right? So Tata Sons or whatever will come up, will research something, and then they will take out someone from their management pool, and they'll say, okay, you run with this. Right, and I think it worked. I think it had an era.
Yeah.
If you ask me, does that era continue today? I think it's. I think not. I think if you look at the data around, a lot of the MNCs out there and a lot of Indian companies, a lot of their successful brands. I think somebody was telling me, after Coca-Cola invented Coca-Cola, they acquired all their other brands.
Yeah.
Right. So they couldn't really produce an in-house brand. So I think I think that's a very tough idea that you and I think people have tried it and it's had very, very mixed results.
Yeah. I've seen a few like that in the VC world as well, also in India. But as you rightly said, it's just But most of those were like international funds which backed somebody and said that this is an area we want to back and try and figure it out. But it hasn't played out for them either. Also on that.
Yeah, it's been a tough one, right? I mean, I think you know about the one very big case, right?
Yeah.
That had to be rescued. Everyone got lucky with that.
Entrepreneurship is always, I mean, you look for people who look for hard problems, who look for problems which others are not looking at, who are looking to solve. The fund by itself is still an early stage fund. It's not a late stage fund. So you really need people who are going to have the same vision after that to put in significantly more money to scale the idea to take it to significant, I mean, does it always play out like that? Does it frustrate you sometimes that people don't get what you're trying to do with some of these things?
Yes, I certainly think in India we are in a not fully developed capital ecosystem, right? So there aren't enough Series A funds, Series B funds, and Series C funds out there. So you do run into that capital risk where a perfectly good idea or a perfectly viable thing may not get funded just because there aren't enough funds out there and they have enough to meet their quota for the year, right? And they don't need to look at more ideas. So you sort of, I think we are still, in my opinion, 10 years away from a mature capital financing ecosystem where ideas, where all meritorious ideas will get picked up. But even in the US, right? I mean, there's a story, right, of the Google of how they ran around with a business plan for 5 years before anyone funded them. Yeah.
I mean, the follow-on seems to come a lot easier in the US if the idea works, right? Even though, I mean, if there are more believers of an idea as such, is that just a function of the scale of
number of the size of industry?
Size of the industry itself.
Yeah, there's just more general partners and more capital out there.
And have you seen this grow in India in the last 5 years?
It has grown, but the growth is not even, right? So I think late stage financing, which is Series DE, right? Because of the sheer amount of international funds which are operating in India, I think that is fairly well supplied, right? I think Series A, B, and even C financing, I think is still tough.
Yeah.
I think a lot of meritorious companies are not going through.
Yeah.
If you ask me. Yeah. What has been your experience?
I feel the same. I feel that, and I feel worried as well also because a lot of ideas are then pushed to deliver results a lot faster than they actually can deliver results as such, and they don't have the support system available, which is going to take it to B and C.
Right.
And that happens. I mean, DE, by the time you reach DE, I think your percentages and odds have changed dramatically at that point. I think we just tend to not have that much. So I'm wondering do you see a lot of action happening in that area? Do you think a lot of...
So I think entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs which are fund managers are going to come in and fill this space. Okay. I think that's what we as entrepreneurs do, right? We look for gaps in the market and we try to enter those gaps. I think teams will come up which will be Series A teams and Series B, C teams. They'll create funds which address those specific spaces.
Yeah.
Those gaps.
It's the reason I ask you that question is because in almost every vertical in India, there are just one or two. We've never allowed 3 and 4 to succeed almost.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Which is a shame because we're such a large country. Right?
Yeah, we're a billion people and we don't have a 3 and 4 ecosystem
we don't have 3
at
or
all.
4 ecosystem. Yeah, it's a shame, I think, if you ask me.
You speak about practice randomness. And randomness, like random, even the way you speak about luck as well also. Yeah. It's a lot like random probability. People who are, you speak about the roll of the die as well also, that you don't get even numbers or you don't get even shot unless and until you have like 100 roll of the die as well also.
Right.
And a lot of people, like in the movie 21, follow random probability as well and try and figure that out. Do you see luck playing out a lot like that?
So our chapter, Practice Randomness, is the 7th chapter in the book. It's the 7th is it the 6th?
Yes.
Okay, the 6th chapter, there's one more after that. Yes, there is one more after that. You're right. So it's the sixth chapter in the book. And I think, and what that chapter talks about is largely about having a great network, right? What happens, I think one of the shortcomings I've seen people make in creating their network is that their network is not diverse enough, right? So people know a lot of people of the same kind, right? A lot of doctors know a lot of other doctors, a lot of entrepreneurs know a lot of other entrepreneurs, fund managers and entrepreneurs all know each other, but they don't know enough, let's say, government officers, writers, and other kind of people in there, hoteliers and so on and so forth. So their network is not sufficiently diverse, right? And when they try to get things out of that network, they don't, they don't get things in there. And one thing I found, so I'll tell you a story. My mother was buying an apartment in Bombay, right? And there was a builder, and Bombay builders, I don't know what they're like in Chennai, but they're very difficult to negotiate with over there, right? So we had this old school builder, one Mr. Mittal, and my mother was buying an apartment from him, and he was very tough. He had kind of given a very high price, and he was saying, no, I'll give you a parking very far away, and I'll charge you so much for the parking. And in Bombay, they charge for all kinds of things. We'll charge you for the passage also, and we'll charge you for this also. So tough negotiator. And I couldn't get him down, and my mother lived in Dubai. My mother and father lived in Dubai. They wanted that place, and I was living in Bombay. And I was a very young guy, and I wasn't as experienced a negotiator as he was. And I was sitting in my office, and I had an appointment that day with somebody who wanted to do, in those days I used to import planting material for the flower industry, right, to supply to farmers. And somebody said, there's some guy who's returned from the US who wants to meet you, right, because he wants to do this farming. He has land in Pune and he wants to do this farming over there. So I said, okay, great, I'll meet the guy. So there was this guy, he was an Indian American. He had returned to India and he wanted to set up this farm. So I had a long conversation with him. I said, yeah, we can supply you this planting material, different varieties which can grow on that farm, blah, blah, blah. We had that conversation. And then I don't know how it led to that, but I told him, man, I'm really struggling with this thing. Or maybe I said, I have to go for this meeting, with this guy, this old guy. I'm dealing with this builder. He's really giving me a hard time. He's not budging on the price, and my mother doesn't want to pay more than this much, and I'm stuck between the two. So he said, oh, that Mr. Mittal, he's my father-in-law. Don't worry, I'll speak to him, In Marwadi family, son-in-laws have a lot of weight. So don't worry, I'll speak to the guy, right? And he spoke to the guy, but I got him, that guy said, he's saying, boss, you pulled such a string, on me. I have to get the price I have to give it for the price that you want. So that's when I learned that, having, if you believe in this notion that there are 6 degrees of separation in the world, you can genuinely leverage that, provided you have a diverse enough network. So one of the things we encourage entrepreneurs and founders and people in corporate life or whoever it is to have this kind of diverse network. This guy was a random guy. He wasn't from my network at all, right, to sort of leverage. And I've consciously tried to do that. And that has worked very well for me. I think Bob also gives some excellent examples of how he's tried to do that. So that is one of the practice randomness chapter that we've got.
I'm going to take randomness to another degree and ask you this. My friend Chandu had sent me an article, and it spoke about how more professors with early alphabets get tenure in America.
Okay.
More CEOs are born in specific months of the year. Okay. More entrepreneurs are successful if their surnames are Bansals in India. Have you found anecdotes like that?
I haven't. To be very honest.
It's been one of my regrets I'm not a Bansal.
Yeah. So no, I haven't. And I think the book wishes to challenge that very notion that these kind of random things happen, to people. That is what the book is against.
Yeah. Yes. But it's a planned randomness that you speak a lot about. Almost like you expand your network, you will always find the 6 degree of separation will work in your favor as opposed to any other time. And you should have the courage to go out and meet people and interact and increase your network and do that. And that's it's very powerful. It works in itself also. Entrepreneurs tend to be so obsessed with their problem that they don't kind of go out and do this at all almost.
And the same with people in careers and jobs, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, and all of us, right? We try to solve it in this narrow sort of passage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's exactly what the chapter is about. I think you know, a great network is not just about quantity; it's about diversity of people, right? So, yeah.
Do you find it easy to practice that?
Yes. Once you so the Japanese have a very interesting. The Japanese Zen masters have a very interesting theory. They call it the Satori, right? And the Satori is that if you are aware of something, your chances of getting it are much higher than if you're unaware of something, right? So once you are aware that you should create a diverse network, then you will work towards that.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, once you buy into it, that is something that I should have. It is, you know, in my career, it is important to my job, it is important to my success as a founder. Once I buy into it, I think you do work towards it.
Yeah. Would love to hear a little more about your last chapter, which is about having multiple plan A's. I've always heard about having plan A and then a plan B and a plan C, but you say that it must always be plan A's.
Yes. So that I'll tell you the origin of the chapter on my side. You know, Bob has a different. Both Bob and I had a similar origin to this chapter. So Bob, you know, being part of Pfizer, and you know, I don't know how many of you over here are part of large companies. Can we have a show of hands of people who are part of you know, large corporations?
What is large?
Fortune 500 type of, like, you know, big companies. Right. Okay. So so he was part of a large company, right? And I also sat on all these boards, right? Ola board, PharmEasy board, etc. And what happens in these board meetings very often is that, and not very often, almost every time, is that often 2-3 plans are discussed, and you decide to go with this one plan, right? But the reality is, nobody knows if that one plan is actually the plan. It is a thesis at the end of the day, right? So I'll tell you, I won't name the startup, but in one of my companies, we spent 20 crores on in one of these companies on TV advertising to realize that it didn't work for us, right? They spent all that money and they lost some, you know, over 7 months of doing that to realize it doesn't work, right? So instead of this notion that I should go with this one plan, right? The idea that we have proposed in here is that instead of going with this one idea, do small experiments to figure out which one actually works, right? And then go with that. So instead of having this rejection right up front that, listen, we'll reject all those 3, you should try it out. So in a marketing plan, for example, a TV with a mix of social media, or, you know, you get these different plans. So it's better to try it out, let the market tell you, you know, what the answer is, and then, you know, go with that answer, right? Versus losing a lot of time and money behind this one thing. So that was the origin of that. So that's the idea we've tried to put forward to save people time and energy. I don't know what your experience has been as an entrepreneur.
Actually, oftentimes in young businesses, I think that's a mistake, and also when you have the cash to make to be able to recover from that mistake as well. It's a mistake I think many of us have made. I could happily say that there's a ton of money that we could have stopped in an early part had we realized that things are not working in our favor for that, but we went on with it for a lot longer than we should have as well. So, I mean, in hindsight, it obviously makes a lot of sense, and we're possibly smarter from that experience today. But definitely, I mean, having the ability for every plan to say that if it doesn't work, then what next? and then keep iterating on that at real-time basis is really something that at least now we've gotten better at. I won't even say great at, but still gotten better at doing that part.
One of the good things I see, in some of the best entrepreneurs is like you look at, for example, Ola. The founders are always launching new products. I don't know if you've noticed that, right? And many of those fail. Sometimes you get a whole year and they've launched 10 things and all 10 things failed. Buses and all kinds of things, right? But then every now and then they find one that works.
Yeah.
So they have this always be experimenting mentality. So they tried out, cabs internationally in Australia that worked. So they took it to Australia, New Zealand, and now they've taken it to the UK. Something in electric vehicles is working, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a great mentality to have, whether it's on launching marketing plans or whatever you want to do, is first get some proof of concept for it and then go big.
Yeah. With my last question, I would love to open this for the audience. We did. No, that was my last question.
So I know there are a lot of women in the audience, and women have always, for example, you take venture funding, US also 0 to 6% any given year.
Yeah.
So how do you see a group like this or any other disadvantaged group would not perhaps relate to what you're saying?
Well, I'm not sure they believe they're disadvantaged, but I think they might. You can beat them up outside for that. But I think it's a great question. Why are we not seeing more women in entrepreneurship? Why are we not seeing more, more female VCs also, for that matter, right? I think it's something we've all been knocking our head over, and I can certainly tell you that whenever we come across a set of female entrepreneurs, we are all ears. We are like, yes, we want to make this one work, right? Because we definitely want that in our portfolio. And I'm sorry to say that I think I would like to call it the problem of the funnel. There's just not enough incoming in there to sort of do this. And though our experience with female founders has been excellent, we find that the female founders have a different approach to the business. So while the male founders will come and they'll try to build this big company, they'll burn a lot of cash around it. The women are a little bit more conservative. They'll grow it slowly, a little more profitably, more cautiously, and they'll hold on to more equity in the company than the boys do because they dilute lesser. So their value creation at the end of the day is probably the same, right? But they did it differently. So we've got this company, Fab Ali, out of Delhi. These two girls, Shivani and Tanvi, they founded the company, and they had this great idea that women in India want to wear modern clothes, but they don't want to wear Western clothes. So they set about modernizing Indian clothes. And that's now doing 100 crores top line. It's an EBITDA positive company. Yes, we would love to see more and more in the funnel, but I think it's a matter of funnel, and I don't know how much we can do to improve the funnel.
You mentioned about preparedness. If you're better prepared, luck will generally be on your side. That's the message I got.
Sure.
Is it similar to better planning? See, sometimes people plan well in advance, they are seemingly successful.
Yeah.
But the current generation of crop of people, they just don't plan, but they're randomly successful. So is preparedness and planning similar, or they are slightly different from a luck standpoint or success standpoint?
I think certainly planning helps. Planning helps. Over planning is also an issue, but they're a little different. Planning and preparedness. Preparedness is more a study. A plan is more, I would say, an execution. Right? That I've already decided what to do and how am I going to do it. Right? So I think there's a little difference in the two. Oh, by the way, we forgot to mention this. That
oh yes, sorry. 3 best questions, get a copy of the book. Yeah. Yes.
Who's going to rate it?
I can tell you Chandu lost. You're getting a whack at home.
I have a question here. My name is, maybe I'll get up. Raja Raman from a company called AHA.
Hi, Raj.
How important is age of a founder to getting funded?
There's a bit like the gender question, but no, I think it's not. So we funded, well, I mean, look at Donald Trump versus Obama, right? One guy became president in his 70s and one guy became in his, 40s, if I'm not mistaken, 40s. I think as venture capital investors, one doesn't look at that. One is seeing founders. We have a company called Sapiens, which is doing very well, where the founders are in their 60s, right? They're doing very, very well. Shirish and his wife are the founders. Also a very unusual team, husband and wife team as founders. A lot of people tell you that doesn't work. So all kinds of things work. I think venture capital firms will not look at those kind of biases in there at all. I've never seen that.
Actually, we have a good example in Chennai as well, eShakti.
Okay.
Well funded, and Paragon's now put a ton of money into it as well also.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's I think, how old will he be? Late 50s, yeah.
This is quite young.
Rehan, most of what you have said, I haven't read the book, but most of what you have at least articulated now seem to be intuitively things that one has to do,
Right.
So, is there not something beyond all of this? And that normally is luck, right? I work hard, I prepare for something, I read up, I build my network. All of this is par for the course, and somebody has to do all of this. And all of this and beyond, and that beyond element is the luck, right? So, I'm just trying to configure this.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think if you read through the book, is there some kind of secret in there which has never been available before? I don't think so. I think like a lot of things in life, there are some obvious things that we often don't do. And I'll also tell you something that some of this is a matter of training, right? While we know these things, or they are all out there. There's nothing which we've taken out of some secret vault and we've put in over here. But I think if somebody had, when I was a younger person, if somebody had trained me in some of these things, I think it would have helped in many ways, right? So that was sort of the objective of putting it out there. Very often just telling or training. I mean, a lot of things that we learn in life from our parents or schools, etc., are basics, right, out there. But those basics are very important, and people who don't have those basics often, do things in a different manner. So I think a lot of them are basics in there. One of the notions, though, I want to dispel is the notion that you just spoke about of work hard, right? So this thing of working hard, I think we've all been told in life, work hard and you'll kind of this thing. And I'll tell people, man, I'm working hard, I'm working really hard, but I'm not getting anywhere in life, right? I think that is the story of a lot of us. That's the stuck period of our lives. So that is why we wanted to actually put some things out there of how you can maybe break that. That is not just working hard, do the multiple plan A's. We have a notion in here, one of the chapters we have is something called of the beginner's mind, right? Again, there's a Japanese Buddhist, Zen Buddhist notion of Soshin, right? Which says that in the mind of a beginner, there are many possibilities. In the mind of an expert, there are few. So one of the chapters we have is simply of looking at things in a more open-minded manner. And we've given some case studies in there. We gave a case study of this company called Country Delight, which reinvented itself because they had an open mind despite being a 4-year-old company. So I think we wanted to put it out there. Sometimes when you're stuck, look at things with a fresh mind and things like those. So yes, so there's nothing which is unknown or like in there. But I think just saying it.
Rehan here.
Hi, Rehan.
Hi.
I'll just finish this. Well, I just wanted to say we heard a lot about preparedness, preparation.
Yeah.
Now, in Deepak Chopra's book on 7 spiritual laws of life, he says he defines good luck as preparedness with opportunity is luck. Either of them don't make it. So when you said in your initial talk,
Right.
we have to be prepared. When do you, in your judgment, actually feel that this is the opportunity? Did you have any particular intuition that this was the opportunity, and therefore, when your preparedness matched with the opportunity to add this word called luck?
Oh, absolutely. So the notion that we are saying is that in a growing world, the world economy is constantly expanding, India's economy is expanding, and so on and so forth. There's opportunities constantly being created, right? There are new opportunities are constantly available. So you need to prepare in order to get those new opportunities ahead. So it is a given that there are new opportunities which are coming, but it is preparedness which allows you to get those opportunities. So that is what we are saying. So that's why we don't talk about the opportunity part, because I think in today's world with ever expanding economies, technologies, and so on and so forth, there are land of new opportunities all the time.
Rehan, here.
Was it luck or a random thought that made you?
Yes?
Or a random thought that made you?
The author.
Was it a random thought of preparedness that made you?
Well, the author thing, like I spoke to you about, was really Bob nagging me, do it, do it, do it. So maybe, it was really that we got to do this, right? So I don't know if it was neither. It was the good
So
old.
entrepreneurs can nag Oris for money.
Yeah.
It was our luck that he wrote the book.
Hi, Rehan.
Hi.
Thanks for your insights. I'm Sridhar from Great Lakes, come from partly from academic background. Now we are going towards the $1 trillion economy, and startups are the key things.
Yeah.
But do you think we are trying out with incubation centers, lot of initiatives and all? Do you think entrepreneurship can be taught or made to bring in a lot of entrepreneurs, or still it should be intuitive?
Yeah, certainly entrepreneurship can be taught. I mean, one has to look no further than Y Combinator in the United States, right? Which is this incubation program where they give you measly amount of money. I think just $100,000 or $75,000 or something like that, and then they actually take you through this course, right? Which is a 4 or 5 month course, and I think Y Combinator has a stake in more unicorns in the world than any other fund. Right? So I think you can certainly be trained and taught in every area. I met I have a friend in my YPO, and he was telling me something interesting the other day. He said, I didn't study a lot, but he had sold his company to Hitachi, right, which is a Japanese company. He said, I got trained a lot. He said, I'm very trained now because Hitachi is continuously training me, right? So he said, though I only went to I did my Bachelor of Arts, he said, but now I'm very trained because of that. So I think, training, learning is a wonderful thing. I think you can certainly be taught a lot of things in this world.
Hi there.
Hi.
So you are in a field where you invest in people who have limited past track record. So how integrity and governance probably is a very key factor for your investments to be successful in the longer run. So how do you really identify entrepreneurs who you feel have that level of integrity? Is it data, is it intuition, or is it something else?
No, so I'll tell you the good news. The good news is that I've been investing for 11 years, portfolio of more than 60 companies across the funds, personal. Never had an integrity issue. I think the new crop of entrepreneurs which is coming out there are not really looking to, do mischievous things. Generally we are not seeing that. So that is not a big problem to solve. Yes, they come, they fail, they have issues, etc. But we till now we haven't seen, that's not really something.
It's a
in our
massive
world.
outlier to find someone like that.
Something like that. That's not a thing. Yeah.
Will the backbenchers ever get a chance?
Exactly.
Sorry?
Will the backbenchers ever get a chance?
No, absolutely.
For the question or the book?
Hi.
Let's go row by row. No.
Two moderators today. One is Mithun, the other one is.
No, let's go to the backbenchers.
Yeah, we'll do after you will go there.
Hi, Rehan. I'm an academician, so this question is somewhat theoretical. So you or your co-author read this book by this Nassim Taleb, this Fooled by Randomness, the hidden role of chance in life and markets?
I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's the same question that I.
Okay. I haven't read that book. I've never read any of his books.
I don't know if he's on. Hi. Should I go?
Go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for the session. I really enjoyed it. So I'm currently a student, and I think, as you said, diversifying your network and the power of networking is definitely very important. But how would you say somebody can diversify their network, or what are ways to make sure you have a powerful connection? Any tips on how we can better our networking?
I'm trying to think at your age how to do that. I know how to do it at my age. So what would I do if I was a student, right, to diversify my network?
ISEC.
ISEC, maybe, yeah. Cross student organizations.
Come and join as a volunteer at CIC.
There you go.
Join TIE as a student member.
Organizations and groups. Organizations and groups is the short answer. So whether it's CIC, TIE, ISAC, etc. Which is the same thing here, right? So that's why you at our level you've got YPO, TIE, EO, and all these kind of things, which give you the diversity. So I think organizations and groups help with diversity. Yeah.
Well, I am Ramesh. Well, I have got two small questions. One is, we seem to get a lot of jargons being thrown out from time to time, like the valuation game being played by the players out there. And also now we have got a new thing called cash burn rate as one of the methods of valuing and stuff like that. So, which is quite different from the age-old model of EBITDA being calculated for 3 years or so, and then coming to some conclusion as to whether this business is really worth it or not, especially from the point of view of a banker and stuff like that. So how did all these new things are being handled by VCs? Valuation game.
So admittedly, VC valuation is a bit of a voodoo art.
Yeah.
It's not, if you were going to come and tell me that, there is a real science behind it, it's not so, right? It is a voodoo art. VCs do get it very wrong. I think we saw WeWork's valuation crash from 40 billion to 8 billion, right, when they try to IPO. So they do get it wrong. You see, in a world where your company is yet making EBITDA losses, right, how do you value? I think that is my only answer is it's a bit of a voodoo art. There's not a perfect science around it. I mean, there are various things. You look at top line model, you look at future growth projection, you look at things like that. But you're absolutely right. It is not very scientific. Typically, what happens is that you look at parallels in the industry when you do your valuation. So currently, company, let's say, is doing 1 crore rupees a month top line. How much would other similar kind of companies have been valued in other areas? And you kind of try to put it around that. I mean, Mithun, what was your experience?
As an entrepreneur, it really, what matters is how much of equity can you save and how much money do you need to take you from this problem to the next stage of the problem itself also. Because anyways, it's not money coming in your hand.
Yeah.
So really it is money which you are getting to solve the problem furthermore that you were thinking about. So I think as an entrepreneur, I don't think anyone who's been through round one doesn't over obsess about it either. You just want to feel that it's fair and you got the right partner to go and sort of build that business. An early stage, I don't think there is any method at all. They just look at the business and say that, okay, what is it that will take you from here to viability at least? and they give you that money and say, okay, to sustain your interest, what kind of equity can you afford to dilute as well, and they'll give you that. But I think the valuation is more what you read on Economic Times rather than what actually is a conversation that happens between an entrepreneur and a fund that much. It's just great for the newspaper.
Yeah. And coming to the second question, what is the level of exit options that you normally have so as to make a decent exit in terms of better returns and stuff like that? And how tough is it, or how risky is it? How much amount of pressure that is being put on the entrepreneur from the exit angle? Because we have seen certain cases like Coffee Day and stuff like that. And so is it really a big thing that Siddharth has come out with that kind of allegation?
I think yes, venture capital funds, when they invest, they have a life, 7 years, 10 years, when they've, because what are venture capital funds? Venture capital funds are pools of other people's money. It could be your money, family offices, insurance companies, etc. And they've told those companies that, listen, those investors, that we will return your money in X amount of time, right? And they're bound by that. So let's say you've invested in a venture capital fund and the guy has told you, okay, it's a 7-year fund, so at the end of 7 years, you expect that return, right? So venture capital funds will put those, will try to generate their own exit, in that period of time. The good news is that that nowadays there are more exit options available than previously, right? So there are more secondary buyers in the private market. There are, the IPO market has been fairly robust in India. There are, there are acquirers of businesses in there. So I think there are a lot more options than there used to be. But like I said earlier, it's a continually maturing ecosystem. Are we fully mature? I think we're still 10 years away. So there's still issues.
Also, maturity of the partner you choose as well. And if you choose, most funds that are mature, but there are definitely some funds which are less mature as such like that. But it's a choice that you make as well also.
I think we've got a great example of Mithun himself here, who gave an exit to his previous investor with his new investor.
Yeah, and frankly for me, I didn't give a great return to my investor as such, but it was at no point stress or something like that. He understood that this business was not the way it would have been, the way he thought about it, but it was perfectly right in the way I was thinking about it. So why do you take the money as well? You take the first round of money so that you solve the problem, and it takes you from point A to point B. And at that point, you essentially see whether do you still need VC money to solve it, or you're going to not need that. In my case, a strategic was a much better fit at that point to grow or solve the business, which I needed to do as well. But I think there was no heartburn. I think we still happen to be very good friends or do whatever we need to do with that part. Siddharth's example is an outlier in the case as well also. We don't know how many other, there is tax, there is everything else that's spoken about and all of that. So I don't think that's an appropriate judgment of a VC-entrepreneur relationship at all on that. And they only ask for their money back, nothing else.
I have probably the last question. Okay. So I'm just curious to know, to prove the point in your subtitle, which says the role of luck as the predominant success factor, have you come across any successful venture where the person who leads it, drives it, is actually indisciplined, unprepared, lazy, probably even bigoted, but still makes it because he got lucky? Have you come across anybody like that? So
well, Donald Trump is accused of all these things.
I was just going to say, somebody like Donald Trump. But in terms of a business,
I haven't in my portfolio, but we have, of course, cases like Donald Trump, etc., which are accused of it. I'm sure he's a very smart man, but there are these perceptions. I would say there are certainly perceptions that this person is lazy, bigoted, weird, but Lady Luck loves him, right? There is certainly that perception, but I think when you scratch the surface, and that's actually what this book was about, right? When I don't know if you were here when I first, I think you came a little later, when I first started speaking, I said that me and my co-author actually got around this, was exactly this question that we asked ourselves, that does luck just favor some people and not favor others? At the end of a lot of hours of conversation, we actually came to the answer that what is seen as luck is a result of a lot of conscious decisions made by that person. Yeah.
Yeah. Rehan, you mentioned about this lack of
I hope
Series
you're
A
keeping track of the
funds.
best questions.
I am.
Okay. I'm on it.
You briefly touched upon this point of lack of Series A funds available for many ventures. And I know we have seen so many angel investments and there are a lot of early stage investments available in India. But the risk capital, growth capital is very much lacking in the ecosystem. According to your assessment, is it because the whole financial services industry, as you mentioned, is it maturing? Do we have the luxury to wait for another 10 years and then go through that path? Or we should learn lessons and release risk capital for Series A funds, because there's a chance of many good business ideas not getting Series A funds are going to get folded up. What is your take on that?
Oh, my take is you should certainly release the capital towards the Series A, B, C funds, because the very premise is that there are many good opportunities available in there that you can get a hold of at possibly at great prices, because it's not a lot of competition in there. So I think it's certainly a great time to be an investor in Series A, B, C.
Do we have the luxury to wait for another 10 years to get into that?
I mean, you can wait, but somebody else, but your opportunity cost will be very high.
Massive.
Yeah. The opportunity cost will be very high because somebody else will come in for those 10 years and reap those gains, right? So there are savvy, I mean, Mithun's company was invested in by a foreign company, by a company called Tiger Global. So Tiger Global is this company in the US that actually, in a way, specializes in making overseas investments in emerging markets. They have a lot of operation in China, India, because they see that these are ecosystems where the domestic market is not providing capital. So, that whole firm operates on this basis. So I think a lot of domestic investors have lost out on wealth creation. So there are 32 unicorns in India. They have created $90 billion in value. If I look at Indian investors, they would have maybe less than 1% of that value captured. Yeah.
Hi. My question is about the investment in Uber. When Uber went public, we were told that they're getting a valuation of about 80 billion.
Yeah.
They lost 3 billion last year.
Yeah.
But the surprising disclosure they made, I don't know if it's a genuine one or what, but they said they may never ever make a profit. Now, in a situation like that, why would somebody invest?
You're right, the stock price has fallen massively after that. They're down 40% from that. But I think that disclosure was required from the SEC perspective, also so that you don't get sued if you don't make profits for quite some time, that you put it up front. I think this whole notion of unprofitable companies or companies which are not returning capital is largely a phenomena that Jeff Bezos created in the US, right? He created Amazon. They don't pay dividends. They do all kinds of things and they lose money and they keep growing. The share price keeps going up, right? So I think a lot of people have followed that trend. But lately we are seeing a lack of support for that model in the public ecosystem. India, it has no support at all. In the US, I think because of Amazon, it gained support for a period of time. But I think people are realizing that possibly there's only one Bezos out there. Berkshire Hathaway only pays dividends.
Yeah.
It's only about dividends. It actually never sells.
But Amazon makes a lot of money in AWS.
Yeah.
So it's not a model which others can replicate.
Exactly. So I think the market is realizing that, you know, it's not, everything is not apples and apples, you know. So
Also,
it's
capital raise is very low in Amazon. Overall capital is only 50 million or something.
some absurdly low number. He raised one round and then went public.
Yeah.
8 million Series A and then went public.
42 or something like that. So 50 million in all is the capital raised.
Yeah.
So there's cash flow somewhere.
Yeah.
You had mentioned about Redbus. In the context you were mentioning about it making 1% gross margin, therefore it was not attractive. But Ola doesn't even make 1%. I mean, but I think it is still yet to make money, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't have public numbers. But what really is the point at which investors look at the value? I mean, do they focus on gross margins when they talk to an entrepreneur, or do they focus on the potential to make a gross margin at some point of time in the future?
Potential to make a gross margin. Certainly potential to make a gross margin should exist.
Also, Ola does charge a commission.
Yeah. So I mean, currently, because Ola is preparing for its IPO, it is now profitable on every ride. I mean, this is in the public domain. This is not some inside information, so I can tell you that. So they do make a profit on every ride, and you know, it's a decent gross margin.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I thought you wanted the mic back. I did lose track of it, but your eloquent question does.
Unless it's alphabetical order, my name starts with A.
So there is random probability there also. Thank you so much.
This is the way of releasing the book.
Yes.
Big round of applause.
Thank you. Ah, there you are. I was looking for you. Yeah.
And your name? Mithun is carefully choosing.
Tough task tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to give one from my side, you know, to her who asked this question, from the student question. I think it was a great one.
So on behalf of Chennai International Center, TIE Chennai and Chennai Angels, let's give a big round of applause to Rehan for being here. And Mithun for being in conversation. Thanks, Mithun. It's a nice, cozy crowd and a very pertinent topic at a time when, you know, we see a lot of entrepreneurs focusing so much on work, but these basics, I think, like you rightly said, practice is most important. We're missing the students crowd here. They would have definitely enjoyed this, but the video will be up on YouTube, and I hope many more can watch and benefit from it. Thanks again, Rehan, and thanks, Mithun. Thank you all for being here. See you all soon.